I searched for it! Open the door! Open the door! I searched for it!
FBI and DEA have launched a large-scale federal operation in Minneapolis, targeting a fentanyl network believed to be operated by members within the Somali community.
At first glance, nothing about the block suggested it was under watch.
Cartels are all suppressing methamphetamine tablets, and these look exactly like an Adderall pill.
Fake pills, fentanyl sticks, methamphetamine.
Crystals, these are from Mexico.
These are just some of the 500 pounds of drugs seized in a federal crackdown on the Sinaloa cartel in New England.
It led to 171 cartel member arrests. These are high-level arrests, not low-level retail distribution.
The street in South Minneapolis sat quiet in the early hours. Winter frost settled on rooftops, lights still off in most homes.
DEA and our partners around the world are focusing all our efforts on breaking the Sinaloa cartel with arrests and seizures everywhere. They're one of the most dangerous threats on the planet to the health and safety of our communities, and I hope that this operation is a step towards the removal of this threat from our homes.
It looked like any other morning in a working neighborhood where people trusted the routines around them. Then the calm broke. Federal agents moved in with precision, surrounding the residents before anyone inside fully understood what was happening. Commands echoed through the cold air as officers announced a search warrant and ordered the door opened. Within moments, the house that neighbors associated with family gatherings and quiet respect became the center of a coordinated federal raid. Authorities later confirmed that the operation was part of a large-scale investigation targeting a fentanyl distribution network operating inside Minneapolis. Investigators believed the network had quietly embedded itself within a Somali family structure, blending into everyday life while moving enormous quantities of synthetic opioids through the city. According to federal estimates, more than 1 million lethal fentanyl doses were taken off the streets during the operation. Enough, officials warned, to devastate entire communities if it had continued circulating. The seized drugs included counterfeit pills designed to resemble prescription medication, powdered fentanyl, and methamphetamine crystals traced back to cartel-linked supply chains originating outside the United States. This was not a low-level street bust. Investigators described it as a dismantling of a high-capacity distribution node tied to a much broader system. In related enforcement actions, authorities pointed to hundreds of pounds of narcotics seized and dozens of arrests connected to cartel operations across multiple regions. The message from federal agencies was clear. These networks were no longer operating at the margins. They were deeply entrenched. What made the Minneapolis case stand out was how ordinary it appeared from the outside. Investigators said the individuals involved did not live flashy lives or draw attention to themselves. Families attended community events. Children played in the yard. Neighbors exchanged greetings without suspicion. But behind that appearance, federal records would later reveal millions of dollars in unexplained cash movement routed through small businesses, cultural associations, and private transfers that never appeared on tax filings. One figure emerged at the center of the investigation. A middle-aged community organizer and business owner known for speaking softly at meetings and donating to local causes. His two-story brick home, valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars, was seen as a symbol of stability and success. Few questioned how that success was funded. Investigators did. Financial analysis traced more than $6 million moving through connected accounts in less than 2 years. The money flowed quietly, structured to avoid detection, passing through legitimate-looking channels that masked its origin. What neighbors saw as prosperity, agents saw as a signal. Still, the truth did not surface on its own. The case broke open because of something far smaller, something that should have meant nothing. A routine traffic stop late one winter night. A broken tail light. A trunk inspection that revealed sealed bundles, a digital scale, and tens of thousands of dollars in cash. That single stop changed everything. Within days, local authorities escalated the case to federal partners. Within weeks, surveillance expanded. Phone records were reviewed. Vehicles were tracked. Money trails were mapped. What began as a traffic violation turned into an investigation that would pull back the surface of an entire neighborhood and expose a system hiding in plain sight. By the time agents returned to that quiet street before dawn, they were no longer looking at a single suspect. They were moving against a network they believed had been operating undetected for years. In the days following the traffic stop, investigators resisted the urge to move quickly. Experience had taught them that speed could collapse a case just as easily as it could solve one. Instead, they slowed everything down and let the evidence speak. The driver stopped that night was identified as a relative of the man at the center of the investigation. Known in the community as a quiet delivery worker, he had no criminal history that would have raised alarms on its own. What mattered was what sat in the trunk. 2 sealed black bundles. A digital scale. Cash wrapped tightly in rubber bands. Field tests confirmed fentanyl, enough to produce hundreds of thousands of lethal doses. Within 48 hours, the case was transferred to a joint task force. Federal investigators from Minneapolis began coordinating with narcotics and financial crime specialists, quietly assembling a picture that extended far beyond a single vehicle. What they found suggested organization, discipline, and repetition. Surveillance teams were deployed across multiple locations. They watched grocery store parking lots after midnight, warehouse alleys just before dawn, and small repair garages that closed hours earlier than expected. Vehicles arrived and left within minutes. Exchanges were brief. No arguments. No urgency. Everything followed a routine that had clearly been rehearsed. Phone records added another layer. Short calls made late at night. Devices that powered off during the same windows each week. Numbers that appeared briefly then disappeared. Analysts flagged patterns that aligned closely with known trafficking structures, where communication was kept minimal and disposable. Financial investigators focused on the money. Bank records showed deposits that never matched reported income. Transfers labeled as donations, family support, or business expenses, all carefully structured below reporting thresholds. Cultural associations and small import businesses appeared repeatedly in the data, functioning less as enterprises and more as conduits. As the weeks passed, a structure began to take shape. Investigators identified distinct roles within the family. One individual handled logistics, scheduling late-night movements and coordinating drivers. Another kept handwritten records, tracking expenses and payments across multiple notebooks. Others acted as couriers, making short deliveries across South Minneapolis, Richfield, and Bloomington. No one role drew attention on its own. Together they formed a system. What made the operation difficult to detect was how closely it mirrored everyday life. Family gatherings doubled as planning sessions. Children were present during travel, reducing the likelihood of stops or inspections. Familiar locations were used repeatedly because familiarity lowered suspicion. To neighbors, nothing looked out of place. Surveillance logs told a different story. Dozens of late-night vehicle exchanges. A steady flow of cash that never re-entered the banking system. Patterns that repeated week after week with near-perfect consistency. This was not opportunistic crime. It was a routine. Federal agents documented everything. They tracked license plates, mapped routes, and cross-referenced movements with financial activity. Over time, the case moved from suspicion to certainty. What they were watching was not a loose group of relatives making bad decisions. It was an organized distribution network operating behind a family structure. As confidence grew, so did caution. Investigators understood that a premature move could scatter the operation and erase months of work. Warrants were prepared quietly. Entry points were mapped. Each potential suspect was assigned to a specific team. The goal was not just to make arrests but to capture the system intact. Meanwhile, analysts began to see signs that the network was larger than initially believed. Financial transfers linked to accounts in other states. Phone numbers connected to contacts in known transit corridors. Patterns that suggested coordination beyond Minneapolis. Still, the focal point remained the house on that quiet block. Surveillance confirmed it functioned as more than a residence. Late-night activity centered there. Vehicles came and went. Packages moved inside and never re-emerged. From the outside, nothing changed. From the inside, investigators believed the operation was accelerating. By the time winter tightened its grip on the city, federal teams had spent months watching, recording, and waiting. The case was no longer about proving a theory. It was about timing. And when the moment came, it would need to unfold without warning. The decision was made before dawn. The plan was finalized. And the quiet neighborhood that had hidden the network for so long was about to learn what had been moving through it all along. The operation was set for the hour when the city was at its quietest. Before sunrise, while most of the neighborhood slept, unmarked vehicles began to roll into position. Streetlights reflected off fresh snow as federal teams moved with rehearsed precision. Each unit assigned a specific role, each agent briefed on exactly what they would face once the door opened. At 4:56 a.m., the perimeter was sealed. Multiple agencies took their places around the property, covering entry points, adjacent yards, and nearby streets. There were no flashing lights, no sirens. The objective was control, not spectacle. For months, investigators had studied this house from a distance. They knew the layout. They knew which rooms were used most often. They knew where movement tended to occur late at night. Then the silence ended. Commands cut through the cold air as agents announced themselves and ordered the occupants to open the door. For a split second, nothing happened. Then movement erupted inside. Footsteps rushed across the floor. A door slammed shut. Someone attempted to reach the back of the house, only to slip on ice as tactical lights flooded the yard. Agents moved in immediately. What followed was not chaos but discipline. Rooms were cleared one by one. Individuals were detained without unnecessary force. Every action followed a sequence refined through months of preparation. Those inside quickly realized there was no direction left to run. As the house came under control, the focus shifted to what it contained. In the hallway, agents found multiple black duffel bags stacked neatly against the wall. Each bag was identical. Each one sealed. On a nearby table sat a high-speed cash counter, still plugged in, its display frozen mid-cycle. Loose bills covered the floor, suggesting counting had been interrupted without warning. In a drawer, officers recovered a concealed handgun. Not displayed. Not accessible. Hidden for emergencies. But it was the basement that changed the scope of the case. Under a single hanging light, investigators discovered a long wooden table covered edge to edge with ledgers, notebooks, digital storage devices, and printed transfer records. The materials spanned more than 2 years, documenting transactions, routes, quantities, and totals with meticulous care. Names appeared repeatedly, written in both English and Somali. Amounts were listed down to the dollar. Next to the paperwork were additional sealed bundles, matching those seized during the traffic stop weeks earlier. Field analysis estimated their potential output at more than 900,000 lethal doses. Enough, investigators noted quietly, to devastate an entire city. For a moment, the room fell silent. Standing beneath that dim light, agents understood they were no longer dealing with suspicion or theory. They were looking at the operational core of a distribution network that had been functioning undetected in plain sight. The house did not feel like a family home anymore. It felt like a command center. Upstairs, the individual believed to be directing the operation stood under guard, no longer shielded by reputation or routine. The contrast was stark. The man neighbors trusted, the figure associated with community meetings and charitable donations, now faced the physical evidence of what had been hidden behind that image. As evidence teams cataloged each item, the scale continued to grow. Plastic containers labeled with coded initials. Hard drives containing shipment logs. Receipts tied to cash movements that had never been reported. Everything pointed to planning, not impulse. Design, not desperation. The search extended beyond the house itself. Vehicles parked nearby were examined. Storage areas were opened. Each discovery reinforced the same conclusion. This was not a single location supporting a small operation. It was a hub. By the time the sun began to rise, agents had secured dozens of items that would later define the case. The neighborhood slowly woke to blocked streets and federal vehicles, neighbors watching from windows, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they believed they knew. For investigators, the most difficult part was not the arrests or the seizures. It was the realization of how long the operation had lasted without detection. How easily it had blended into everyday life. How close it had been to people who never suspected a thing. As the last evidence boxes were carried out of the house, one thing was clear. The raid was not the end of the story. It was the moment the story finally became visible. Once the house was cleared and the physical evidence secured, the investigation entered a quieter, more revealing phase. The chaos of the raid gave way to long tables, fluorescent lights, and the slow work of understanding what the network had actually done. Agents returned their focus to the basement. The ledgers recovered there were not casual notes or personal records. They were organized, dated, and consistent. Each book represented a period of activity, and together they formed a timeline stretching back years. Rubber bands holding the pages together had grown brittle with age. Some notebooks were new, their covers barely worn. Others showed heavy use, corners bent, pages yellowed, handwriting evolving but unmistakably from the same source. Financial specialists began with the oldest entries. At first, the amounts were modest. Small transfers. Local payments. Money labeled as donations to community events or support for relatives. Nothing that would immediately trigger alarms. But as investigators moved forward through the books, the numbers changed. 4-digit entries became 5. 5 became 6. Transfers appeared more frequently, sometimes multiple times a week. The language grew shorter, more coded, as if the record keeper no longer felt the need to explain. One entry stood out. A single line showing more than $100,000 moved in a matter of days, with no corresponding business activity to justify it. There were no invoices, no receipts, no tax filings. Just a number written cleanly as if its legitimacy was assumed. Other ledgers revealed international movement. Small transfers routed through multiple cities overseas, each amount carefully chosen to stay below mandatory reporting thresholds. The destinations repeated: East Africa, the Middle East, parts of Europe. Individually, the transfers looked harmless. Together, they formed a laundering pattern that left little doubt about intent. Nearby, agents examined digital records recovered from a laptop seized during the raid. A folder labeled as a routine business operation contained spreadsheets tracking shipments that did not exist, crates that were never logged, trucks that were never rented. Yet the totals in those files matched the cash movements recorded by hand in the ledgers. The paper records and the digital files told the same story, reinforcing each other. This was not improvisation. It was design. Analysts calculated that more than $6 million had moved through the network in less than 2 years. And that figure reflected only what could be documented. Investigators suspected the true total was significantly higher. Money had passed through accounts belonging to distant relatives, elderly family members, and individuals who no longer lived in the United States. Each transfer carried an innocent label: family support, medical help, tuition assistance. But the frequency and timing revealed their real purpose. As the financial picture sharpened, another reality came into focus. The harm caused by the operation could not be measured in dollars alone. Investigators compiled data from emergency services and medical examiners across the Minneapolis metro area. A map was pinned to the wall of a federal briefing room. One by one, red markers were added. Each marker represented a fentanyl-related overdose call or death in the past 18 months. The board filled quickly. South Minneapolis, Richfield, Bloomington, Brooklyn Park. Clusters formed around schools, shelters, and apartment complexes. Records showed more than 170 fentanyl-related deaths in a single year. Many of the counterfeit pills recovered during the raid matched those found at overdose scenes. Some victims were teenagers who believed they were taking prescription medication. Others were adults managing chronic pain, unaware the pills they trusted had been replaced with something far deadlier. In one documented case, a man in his early 60s collapsed in his living room after taking what he thought was a routine dose. He had no history of substance abuse. The pill contained multiple times the lethal amount of fentanyl. Investigators later learned it had been purchased from someone he considered a family friend. That phrase echoed through the case. Family friend. The impact extended beyond the victims. Members of the broader Somali community felt the weight of the revelations deeply. Community leaders expressed concern not for those responsible, but for the innocent families who feared being judged by association. Mosques held meetings. Parents became more vigilant. Community centers increased security. The response was not denial but protection. Agents also uncovered a pattern that troubled even seasoned investigators. Surveillance logs showed that children were sometimes present during drug deliveries. Not as shields, but because families were less likely to be stopped or questioned. In one instance, a minivan arrived at a parking lot late at night. 2 children slept in the back seat. The trunk contained tens of thousands of counterfeit pills. For investigators, that moment crystallized the case. The harm was not abstract. It was personal. It affected families, neighborhoods, and trust itself. As evidence continued to be processed, one conclusion became unavoidable. The network had not simply distributed drugs. It had exploited community bonds, family structures, and assumptions of safety. And the damage it caused would linger long after the evidence was boxed and the house stood empty. As the first week after the raid came to an end, investigators understood that what they had uncovered was not a conclusion. It was an entry point. The evidence removed from the house did not close the case. It expanded it. Ledgers, phones, and digital files were reviewed again, this time alongside data from other jurisdictions. Patterns that once appeared isolated began to align with activity outside Minneapolis. Transactions recorded in the basement matched alerts flagged months earlier in cities hundreds of miles away. Phone numbers traced to contacts in known transit corridors. Financial movements mirrored laundering schemes already under review in other states. What agents saw was a familiar shape. Not a single family acting alone, but a cell within something larger. Inside a federal building downtown, analysts gathered around maps marked with routes and timelines. New pins appeared in places that had not been part of the original investigation. Columbus, Denver, Kansas City. The same structuring techniques. The same transfer amounts kept just below reporting thresholds. The same use of small businesses and trusted community spaces to move money quietly. One investigator summarized it without hesitation. The operation in Minneapolis was not the network. It was a doorway into one. Surveillance warrants were expanded. Storage units, warehouses, and short-term rental properties across Minnesota and neighboring states were added to watch lists. Agents began monitoring locations that, on the surface, appeared unremarkable. Ordinary places. Familiar streets. The kind of settings that had allowed the Minneapolis operation to hide for years. A critical shift came with the analysis of a seized phone. Buried inside was a folder labeled in coded language. When decrypted, it revealed meeting points, initials, and references to additional partners operating farther north. The entries suggested a second cell connected to rural distribution routes, moving shipments along highways at night to avoid attention. That discovery forced investigators to adjust their approach. The network was adaptive. As arrests made headlines, other individuals tied to the operation began to disappear. Phones went dark. Accounts were wiped. Vehicles vanished from usual meeting spots. Some suspects left their apartments without notice. The pattern was familiar. Exposure triggered movement. Despite that, the investigation accelerated. Federal teams began engaging with community leaders, not to assign blame, but to protect those who had been exploited. Private briefings were held with elders, educators, and local organizations. The message was direct. This was not about targeting culture or faith. It was about dismantling systems that abuse trust. In response, some community members stepped forward, sharing information they had once dismissed as insignificant. Small details. Unusual visitors. Unexplained cash. Patterns that now made sense. International coordination followed. Analysts traced portions of the supply chain to facilities outside the United States, raising the likelihood of cross-border involvement. Information was shared with partner agencies. The scope widened again. Through it all, one reality remained clear. The arrests in Minneapolis did not erase the harm already done. Families had lost loved ones. Communities had been shaken. Trust had been fractured. Those effects could not be undone by seizures or indictments alone. In its final assessment, the case forced uncomfortable questions. How many warning signs had gone unnoticed? How many financial red flags were ignored because they appeared routine? How many networks were operating under similar cover, relying on the assumption that familiarity meant safety? The investigation made one point unavoidable. These operations do not survive because they are invisible. They survive because people assume they cannot exist where they live. What happened in Minneapolis was not an anomaly. It was a reminder. When vigilance fades, vulnerability grows. And when trust replaces scrutiny, the cost is paid by those least able to afford it. The raid exposed more than a criminal network. It exposed a system of blind spots. And until those blind spots are addressed, the question investigators now face is not whether another operation like this exists, but where it is hiding next.